Well, hello, friends. Welcome. My name is Doug Bouws. I'm with Money for Ministry, and I'm going to be your host for this webinar today, The Rise of Sustainable Giving, How the Subscription Economy Can Transform Your Fundraising, with our guest today, Dave Raley of Imago Consulting. I don't know about you, but I've got a lot of different subscriptions, and it seems like I'm presented with opportunities to get more of them every day. Well, maybe not quite that much, but pretty frequently. At Money for Ministry, we serve in the planned gift marketing space, but for a long time, we've been super intrigued by the work that Dave's doing with recurring giving, because we believe that recurring donors are some of your best planned giving donors, and certainly some of your best planned giving prospects as well. And so when you start to focus on recurring giving, we know you're also starting to focus on planned giving, and we're really excited about that. So again, super excited for this conversation. So glad to have Dave with us here today. A word about Money for Ministry. We have served faith-based and specifically Christian nonprofits in the evangelical, the mainline Protestant, and the Roman Catholic traditions since 2003. We have a sister company called Canopy Resources, which uses a very similar approach to serve charities from a wide range of sectors, from colleges and universities, animal welfare groups, hospice organizations, and those who provide affordable housing. We're a planned giving growth company, and we want to see every family have a will. We want to see every will have a charity in it, and we want to see every charity have a sustainable future. And since our founding, we've helped ministries and charities add well over $1 billion to their legacy pipeline, planned giving dollars. As folks continue to log on, I have just a few items of interest, some housekeeping details for you to be aware of. There's two buttons at the bottom of your screen in that menu bar there that you want to be aware of. There's a Q&A box. If you have questions as we go, type them there. We've set aside 10 to 15 minutes at the end. We'd love to take your questions. We get some of the best learning that comes out of the back and forth, the conversation, the dialogue that we have together over the topic at hand. There's also a chat window, and this is a great place for you to engage with each other. I'd love to get some conversation going in the chat window here as we get started. A conversation we had on our team at Money for Ministry just last week. Did you know January 23, not too long ago, it's National Pie Day. That's right, P-I-E, the things you like to eat, around the holidays or for a special occasion, not to be confused with March 14, which is also National Pi Day, but that's P-I for the mathematicians among us. So my question for you for the chat, what's your favorite pie? And I look forward to seeing what people write in there today. Yes, the webinar is being recorded for those who can't make it live. For those on your team who maybe couldn't be here and want to see it later, feel free to share it with them. If you registered for this event, you will get a copy of the recording in the next day or so. All right, I'm starting to see some pie come in here. Apple, cherry, chocolate, key lime, pumpkin, coconut cream. I see apple. My favorite pie is a Dutch apple pie. I love that cinnamon, sugar, butter, crunch on the top. And in fact, I have a birthday tomorrow, and I'm hoping for some Dutch apple pie. So anyway, that's exciting. All right, so I want to welcome Dave, our guest today. Dave is the founder of Imago Consulting. It's an advisory firm that helps organizations create growth through innovation. As a speaker and an advisor, he's inspired thousands of nonprofit leaders to grow both personally and organizationally. He's the author of The Rise of Sustainable Giving, how the subscription economy is transforming recurring giving and what nonprofits can do to benefit, which, by the way, launches next week, February 4. And I have a copy right here. I got a preview copy just a few weeks ago. I've read the book. It's really good. You're going to want to get your own copy so that you can learn more about what we're talking about today. But Dave also, he's not only an author, he writes a weekly innovation and leadership column called The Wave Report, which you can subscribe to. And I'm sure he'd love to add you to that list. It's really wonderful insights every Friday to your inbox. And he's the co-founder of the Purpose and Profit podcast, a show about ideas at the intersection of nonprofit causes and for-profit brands. Dave, welcome. It's so glad to have you with us here.
Doug, I am So glad to be here. You and I have known each other for several years. Happy birthday, by the way.
Thanks.
And we have geeked out offline plenty about how the intersection between planned giving and recurring giving. And so just to be here, and it's honestly an honor. I mean, by the way, 2003 Money for Ministry. I think it was about 2006 is when I got introduced to Money for Ministry. So it's pretty early on. And honestly, I learned a lot of what I know about plan giving from you all. So it's an honor to be here.
Yeah, well, we're excited. Again, congratulations. That's an amazing accomplishment. So let's talk about this. So, a book on recurring giving. Um, yeah, why'd you set out to write this book, and why is it important right now?
Um, I I will answer that question, but Doug, I just can't get out of my head. I haven't seen in the chat raspberry pie. Does anyone know what raspberry pie is? See, my wife's from Oregon and she introduced me to raspberry pie, which I think is just maybe a mix of berries. I don't actually really know, but that's my favorite pie. So we can talk
Well,
about the book now, but I just had to get that in there. There we
impressive.
go. Beth Dodson. All right. Oh, from Mr. Magoo. Okay, great. Didn't know that.
I've never
Awesome.
had a raspberry pie.
Razzle Red. Okay, well, put it on the list, Doug,
You know
or
what?
come over here and I'll get you some.
Even in
Um,
thimbleberry pie. Thimbleberry comes from the Upper Peninsula up here in Michigan. So I don't know if anybody's had thimbleberry
put it
pie.
on the list.
Yes, and
Well, everybody, happy belated Pi Day. I cannot think of a good bridge from Pi to a new book, so I'll just jump into the new book. So yeah, so the this year is my 20th year in fundraising. So if you did the math from 2006, right, I entered the industry really 2004, and really learned, cut my teeth on traditional fundraising, marketing. The very first program I ever worked on, Doug, 20 years ago, was with Union Rescue Mission, and it was a monthly giving,
um,
recurring giving program. And I remember two things about that program. I remember number one, how much work it was, because we had a few hundred recurring donors. These were back in the check writing days when everybody, fulfilled their recurring pledge through check. So I had to do the lapsed letters and like print out the materials and double check the data every month. So I remember it being a ton of work, but I also just remember it being vaguely discouraging, Doug, because it was such a small percentage of the organization's budget. I mean, low single digits. The need was huge. I mean, back then, even the face of homelessness in Los Angeles had really shifted. People tend to think of homeless, at least in LA, as the old veteran, the old grizzled old veteran on the corner kind of a deal. And the truth was that more than 50% of the guests at the rescue mission were women, children, and families. And we needed to help them. And I felt like recurring giving was a piece of that puzzle, but just candidly wasn't working. So, fast forward 20 years, I have spent the last 10 years really studying and going deep into how the subscription economy has really begun to transform the way people think about and actually give philanthropically on a recurring basis. And I just remember, Doug, about 10 years ago, thinking, you know what? I saw this with digital. I saw people get used to, putting their credit cards in online, giving via social media from a consumer perspective. And then after a few years, you'd started to see people becoming much more used to and comfortable with giving online to their favorite charities and those sorts of things. And so I said, I wonder if this same kind of consumer trend with subscriptions isn't going to actually begin to transform the way recurring donors give. And so over the last few years, have really seen that take off. In fact, if you're a fundraiser, you've seen some of the oh, by the way, I see Tim Peters. Yay,
uh,
Union Rescue Mission. I love it. I'm glad you're here, Tim. And I grew up in Southern California as well. Like if you can't tell from the Disneyland sign. So I
we
live
had
in Seattle
Richard here
now,
too. Richard
but
was,
we
yeah.
I love it. So really, it was this understanding that giving was changing. Recurring giving is not new. It's been around for thousands of years, by the way. The first ever recurring giving program in recorded history was the ancient Jewish people, Doug. I
Yeah,
think our audience would probably be familiar with the idea of tithing and first fruits.
for sure.
But honestly, in the very first example was, farmers, shepherds bringing the first fruits, the 10% of the first fruits to the temple, and then the priests would then distribute those to the poor, the widows, the orphans. And so recurring giving is not new, but the good news for charities is that it has been shifting over the last 10 years, and I would say especially over the last 5 years to make this opportunity. And so I felt like somebody needs to
Yeah,
candidly write the book.
right.
And so over the last 3 years, 3 years of research, interviews, conducting a national study, 438 hours of writing words and doing interviews and editing and all of those sorts of things. And we are literally, what, 96 hours, something like that, from the book being into the world.
It's so interesting to hear you talk because you reminded me of I worked for a church and I had to raise support for the first like 5 years of my work, and I had an aunt who supported me, and she said, "Can you send me 12 envelopes, and that will be my cue to send a check in every month." And so she was the only one. I think there were others that gave monthly, but she was the only one who asked. And I think about that in light of what you just said. Um, they were self-addressed stamped envelopes. I think I put a stamp on for her. I don't know. Maybe I
Yeah.
didn't. Maybe she said don't put the stamp on. I forget. But in any case, it was a way to, and I think that's part of what we're getting at today is because it's the the trigger or the reminder or it's the that habit, I guess, if you will, to keep
Yeah.
keep giving and to do it regularly.
Well, and for faith-based organizations, this is cross-sector. I wrote the book for, I mean, I studied 9 different verticals of nonprofit, so this is not just a faith-based book, but faith-based charities candidly stand to gain, to benefit, to be able to tap into this because of the heritage of I talk about certainly the ancient Jewish people, but also this Jewish man named Yeshua, who encouraged people to give, and his follower Paul, who wrote about setting aside money every week and bringing it to the deacons. And so, in fact, a recent study on faith-based Christian donors giving on a recurring basis found that evangelical Protestants were 27% more likely to give on a monthly basis to a charity outside of their church or place of worship. And so, especially if you're a faith-based organization, this is even more of an opportunity. So that's what gets me fired up, and that's why I wrote a book.
Awesome. So recurring giving is not new. What about subscriptions? Is there anything? Are subscriptions new, or is that? I mean, does that? Is there more there on the subscription side of
Yeah.
things? How does that
We
fit?
could we can ask our chat, but they're like, no more subscriptions. I
Right, right.
spoke actually to a church group yesterday, a couple of folks that I'm working with, and I said, what do you think of when you think of subscriptions? And I always look for the person who's going to be really honest. And one of the pastors said, I cannot stand them. Not another subscription in my life.
Right.
So but the reality is, Doug, to your point, subscriptions are not new. I mean, the first subscription I think about, in my childhood was Reader's Digest. Is anyone here in the chat remember Reader's Digest? Like,
We look for the what was the funnies, the
oh
joke.
yeah, humor is the best medicine, or laughter is the best medicine, or something like that. I remember my favorite, by the way, my mom would get Reader's Digest every month, and I think I was probably more excited about it than she was, this elementary kid. Columbia Records. Good point, Rich. Yep, that's another one. Um, my favorite column in Reader's Digest was Word Power. Does anyone remember Word Power? It was this right in the middle, and it was uh, like 15 really obscure words that you'd never heard of before, and then like multiple choice answers to try to guess what the word meant. And so I just remember loving that. And you know, Reader's Digest, I think at its height had 120 million subscribers. I meet people today who are still subscribed to Reader's Digest. And so subscriptions are not new, but starting about 12 years ago, we started to see really the rise of what is now known as the subscription economy. And that is subscriptions in really every area of our life, things that provide ongoing value, personalized experiences. These are different than just sort of selling one-off items. It's actually encouraging people to benefit on an ongoing basis from these. And so the average subscription business, by the way, Doug, over the last 12 years has grown 4 times faster, like 4x, not like 40% or 50%, like whatever that is, 300% faster than the general market. And so in the book, I talk about some lessons we can apply from the subscription economy. And I interview a couple of leaders, Robbie Kelman Baxter, who's written 2 books on subscriptions. One's called The Forever Transaction, the other's called The Membership Economy. And then Amy Connery, who actually coined the phrase SaaS, or software as a service. So if you've been in technology, you certainly subscribe to a SaaS, if it's Google or Microsoft Office 365 or MailChimp or, Canva,
Ooh,
you're
yes.
you're a part of SaaS. Well, Amy, she's the head of what is called the Subscribed Institute, and she specializes in that. And so I asked them, like, what can we learn? What can we apply? What are some principles that nonprofit leaders can apply to growing their recurring giving program?
Well, I know in the book, and you talk about the 3 types of recurring giving. I wonder if it'd be helpful for you to just lay that out for people today as a kind of a framework or a bedrock for the discussion that we want to continue to have here. What are they and why do they matter?
Yeah, yeah, let me hit on that. Oh, and by the way, just for your sake, I'm gonna drop a link into the chat. If you do want to read about the book, we have some links later you'll be able to see, but just in case folks are looking for that. Oh, thank you, Janie. Um, the by the way, Doug, I just found out a couple of days ago. I did not know that this was possible because I've never written a book before. I'm a first time author, as they say, that the book hit #1 on the Amazon Hot New Releases list for both nonprofit fundraising and marketing and for charities and nonprofits.
And it's not even released yet. How does
I
this?
know. That's why when my publisher texted me, I was like, I thought that was a thing when a book came out.
Right, right.
I think, and the reason I share that, other than is just thrilling for somebody who spent 3 years and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but also I think it shows the enthusiasm and the how much pent up demand there is for nonprofit leaders to say like, all right, um, it's my turn, So, which actually brings us. So let me talk through these 3 different types of recurring giving. Historically, the first type of recurring giving has been the gold standard, has been what I would call one-to-one recurring giving. So think of the easy way to think of that as your local child sponsorship agency, or maybe missionary or staff support, especially in the faith-based sector, where the donor is actually paired up in some ways directly with the beneficiary. So the donor is giving, but they literally have like a face and a name, typically, that they know that they're supporting. Whether that's, when my kids were born, we sponsored a child with World Vision, and then a child with Compassion. So whether that's Eliani in the Dominican Republic, and we get updates on her and pictures, and we trade letters, or it's a staff person that we support, at a missionary organization. So that's really one-to-one recurring giving, and that's wonderful. By the way, if you can do one-to-one, awesome. But Doug, the problem is the vast majority of charities don't have the type of program or services that are really conducive to building a one-to-one program, either privacy concerns or just candidly, there aren't that many, you know, individual beneficiaries to pair up, with donors. So that brings us to the second type of recurring giving historically, and that is what I would call membership. So the donor is at least partially the beneficiary of the nonprofits, programs, or services. So think of your local zoo or museum or arts institution or public television or public radio. In the faith-based world, there are a lot of what I would call content or broadcast-oriented ministries. They might write books. They might you know, produce content, right? That maybe is not 100% targeted to the donor, but the donor absolutely benefits. I've worked with Focus on the Family for many years. That's a great example. Um, so that's the second type of recurring giving. But again, Doug, there's a problem, and that is the vast majority of charities don't actually provide tangible or intangible benefits to their donors. Their beneficiaries are overseas or, you know, a disadvantaged population like Union Rescue Mission, et cetera, right? So that leaves the third category of recurring giving historically, which is literally everybody else. This bucket of what I would call about 500, um, or not 500, 75% of charities fit into this third bucket. If you do the math, by the way, 1.5 million charities in the US today, that's 1.1 million charities in the US today that have essentially been left behind when it comes to building a strong, growing, recurring giving program. So I wrote the book, by the way, for all three categories. But as you might imagine, given my story about Union Rescue Mission, one of the things I'm most passionate about is how we can help that third category. Because the truth is, because of the subscription economy, changing donor behavior, which we can talk about, more charities, let me say it this way, recurring giving is more accessible to more charities than at any other time in history. And so that's like, okay, that that is something that we're seeing. This we've seen this in the data for the last 4 years. Every basically fundraising trends report often says something like the number of individual gifts, donors giving gifts is down. The amount of planned giving and wealth transfer is up. And the other bright spot is what's been happening with recurring giving. And so it's like, how can we help shed light for nonprofit leaders to take advantage of that?
And you mentioned donor behavior changing, and we were talking about subscriptions earlier, and I know you and I have talked a little bit before about, we both subscribe to our doorbells, which if you could have imagined 20 years ago thinking about what it would be like to subscribe to your doorbell. So, like, what's the value? How does that, like, there's no concept for that. But I guess when I think about the idea of subscriptions, and I love how you set this up here, but just I guess my question, it's doorbells to donations. What's the connection? How does my subscription to my doorbell influence my philanthropy? What's going on there that puts us, this is something we need to tap into?
Yeah. First of all, I love that. The idea of like, what does my subscription to my doorbell have to do with my donors? By the way, if you're in the chat, what does anybody else here subscribe to their doorbell? Do you know what? That's always the question when I speak. Is like, what does he mean subscribe to his doorbell? Tim, you do? Anyone want to share what doorbell subscription they use? I'll share mine. Ring, yeah, there it is. So mine is the Arlo, which I think is owned by Amazon. Ring, lots of Ring users. Yeah, you've got these like video camera doorbells, and I get a notification about 10 times a day that, a cat has walked by the front door or an Amazon package got delivered. But as Doug said, it's like if you would have told me 10 years ago I'd be subscribed to the doorbell company, I'd be like, I'm not sure what you're talking about, but that sounds insane. And yet, our family spends, I think it's $12.99 a month for the ability to see when an Amazon package gets delivered or when a cat walks by the front door at, 2 a.m. So that's the world we live in. So the rise of subscriptions have been everywhere. By the way, Doug, the average American today has, I won't make you guess. Actually, let's make the chat guess. How many subscriptions would you like? Think about your own subscriptions. How many subscriptions would you guess that the average American? 7, 7, 15, 17, 9, 7, 10, 20. Oh, you guys are all like hovering. Oh, there it is. Beth, I saw your name. Beth Dodson and Joanne with 12 subscriptions. The average American has 12 subscriptions. In fact, in the same study, they asked consumers how much they were spending. They estimated they would spend on a monthly basis, and then they actually went through their subscriptions and added it up. The average American underestimated how much they spend on subscriptions by $133 a month. That is $1,600 a year that the average American is paying for subscriptions that they didn't realize they were paying for, or they didn't think of.
I didn't catch it. Oh, yeah, yeah, that's a ton. Wow.
Yeah. 42% of Americans have actually forgotten that they were subscribed to something that they were subscribed to, which, by the way, I'm in that 42%. I don't know about you if you're in that 42%.
We could
But the
nerd out
real, yeah,
weeds on
go
this,
ahead.
but does your internet or your phone count as a subscription? I mean, those have been around for decades, right?
Yes, and there are two, not we don't need to go down this rabbit hole too far, but the banking industry refers to those as discretionary and not indiscretion discretionary, and then whatever the opposite of discretionary, not indiscretionary because that's the wrong word. Non-discretionary, I think, is the term.
Okay.
So your mortgage payment, your power bill, those are things that would fall, they call non-discretionary recurring payments. We've had those. I mean, I've had those since we owned a home, like that's one form, but more than half of all recurring payments today are what are known as discretionary. So they're your Netflix, your Amazon Primes, your you know, Google Workspace, etc. And so we've seen this, but the truth is we've also seen the shift on the recurring giving side. I saw a stat yesterday that 57% of all donors are recurring donors. So I'm digging into that. Like, okay, where's that source? But that mirrors up with what I've seen. When asked, 42% of millennials said that they would be more, was it 40? Let me just double check my number here. I think it was 52%. Do, 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 do. Yeah, 52% of millennials said that they would be more likely to give to an organization on a recurring basis rather than a single one-time large donation. And when you look at recurring donors, we know they're more valuable, but let me give you some quick stats on that. So
Yeah.
the average retention rate for a recurring donor is somewhere between 78 and 86%, um, versus 42% for your general donor. So almost double or more than double, depending on your math. The long-term value for the average recurring donor is 5 to 7 times that of your recurring donor, which, as an aside, by the way, is one reason why I think when we measure acquisition of new donors, we need to look at long-term value just as much as initial gift because they're more expensive to get, but with they're 7 times more valuable, then the logic would follow that you might actually be willing to spend up to 7 times as much to get one of them, right? Now, preferably not that much, but just as an aside. And this is where you and I've talked, Doug. The average recurring donor is 6 times more likely to make a legacy gift to an organization. So even as you think about your elder donor strategy, whatever you want to call it, what does it look like, even if it's smaller denominations, to engage your candidly your plan giving prospects in recurring giving, because it's just that much more. They're that much more sold on the cause.
Well, you could almost ask it both ways, right? I mean, you could ask your planned giving prospects about recurring giving, but I think what the other
That's
thing
true.
you want to ask your recurring giving donors about planned giving. I think like you can go both directions with it.
In fact, Doug, you and I were talking about, and a lot of folks here will know of the name Russell James. Really, has written a lot of research in the space of planned and legacy giving and language and all those sorts of things. Russell and I are going to be speaking at a conference here in a couple of weeks, and he taught me that, and you'd probably know the modern percentages better. This was a few years ago, but I believe it was a majority, past 50%, but a very high percentage of wills and estates are changed in the last 3 years of life. And so, yes, I'm so glad that we've gotten that estate gift commitment when somebody's in their 70s, for example. We need to stay in relationship with them, and one way to do that is through recurring giving.
Yeah, yeah. I hadn't even thought about it like that. But there's
Yeah.
we talk all the time about staying in relationship with those donors so that one, they don't change their minds, but two, if they're changing their will, they're including you for more, not less, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
they stay close to the organization. It helps them to stay bought into the organization. And again, it's not about the amount at that point. It's about it's about that relationship. It's about that communications flow. In fact, and this leads to the next point, the average recurring donor makes for some of the best single gift one-time donors because the average recurring donor will give 25% on top of the amount that they give in a given year. So if you have a donor, for example, that's giving $400 a year, about $40 a month, 30, $35 a month, that's a $400 a year donor. On average, that donor will give an additional $100 because they're the most bought in. They're viewing they're into the organization. So when those one-time opportunities or disasters or year ends roll around, they're often the best responders.
You think about, I mean, this makes sense now. Personally, I think about even my own church. I give monthly, but then they have an appeal at the end of the year for some special cause, and I'm going to give to that too. Uh,
Hmm.
and that just seems like a natural fit. That's that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I was. We had done some linking on this too about, you talk about long-term value, 6 times more likely to make a gift in their will. We had someone ask us about the link between recurring giving and planned donors, planned giving.
Yeah.
And so
Let's talk about that.
our team dug into that and was really curious to see what the links were, if any, and but sure enough. So if you've been on file at least 10 years, and once you've been on file 10 years, the length of time didn't really seem to matter, but the frequency did. So the difference between those who've been on file, I'm sorry, the difference between those who give 5 times a year versus 2 times a year, both for those considering a gift in the will and those who've already done it. Those who give 5 times a year are about 42% more likely to include you in their will than those who give 2 times a year. So frequency, we're saying, is the number one. We've been saying this from our data for a long time. People will say to me, what about a wealth screen, or what about the donor who's made that one gift? I mean, I think this is saying those $5 a month donors, um, they're right. That's $60 a year. That's a better plan giving
Those
plan,
recurring donors. Yep.
right?
That is incredible, by the way, Doug. I mean, when you talk about frequency being the number one correlation, now this is anyone who's been on the file for 10 years or longer, which is a smaller subset, but candidly, one of the most important subsets from a plan giving perspective. The frequency that was by far, when we talked about it, the number one indicator, I think is an absolute validation of the importance of the intersection of recurring giving and plan giving. And so I do think about certainly what does that $5 recurring gift look like, or candidly, the donor advised fund, distribution every month. Like there's a lot of ways, and you know better than I, how your planned giving prospects will give. But the key is again at that point not how much. It's like, how do we stay in relationship for the long haul, and how do we really bless these donors and keep them in the loop and in communication? And when you think about it that way, it's a win-win. Like I remember in 20 years ago when I was doing direct mail, we had an elder donor version of our appeals, and we would say if the donor had been identified as an elder donor, we would not push to upgrade the donor as much. We would say things in the copy like, "We understand that you can't give every time we message you, but we want to keep you in the loop," right? It's if you think about that, but layer into it that commitment of whatever it's $5, $25, $50, $100. It's that ongoing commitment and relationship that's so critical.
Absolutely. Uh, you touched on donor advised funds, and I mean, this is a whole nother discussion we could go on, but there was an article in the Chronicle of Philanthropy just this month suggesting that donor advised funds could become as common as checking and savings accounts. The employers were going to
Yeah.
offer them as, and
Oh,
then
really?
yeah, that could,
I hadn't
just
heard that.
401k, but it could be like, just another employee benefit. Maybe they'd contribute a little bit, encourage you to contribute. But the idea was you're going to start to see donor advised funds, which primarily are probably the major to mid-major level donors, start to trickle down into some of the mid to mass level donors. And now, again, there's the opportunity for recurring giving from a donor advised fund. I think the opportunities are only going to grow, and I'm really curious about that trend.
That's fascinating. So you mentioned I write a wave report every week. So this Friday's wave report, by the way, is 2025 trends to leverage. Because I don't do predictions. I do like what are the waves we can leverage today. And currently number 10, or no, it's actually 8. Number 8 is donor advised funds,
Okay.
Doug, because of but I wasn't aware, like, and you even helped me think about like when you do have like an employer, for example, or a typical financial institution saying, yeah, and here's our easy donor advised fund thing, as opposed to like, I got to get an attorney
Right,
and a
right.
CPA, and I got to like set up an instrument and have like some, fancy tax strategy. We're already on that road. And I expect, obviously, with the current administration, that we're going to see more, they're not going to reverse the, minimum deduction, would be an assumption, not being a tax person, right? That we're going to see more and more adoption of these donor advised funds. So then it's like, okay, what does the recurring giving strategy look like for donor advised funds? Because they're the perfect instrument for a recurring gift because it's like the money's sitting there. Could you just distribute
Right,
a
right.
hundred or $1,000 of that a month,
And
So
they're the perfect really starting point for a legacy gift, a gift in the will as well. I mean, the stats on that are just, I mean, there was one stat 5 years ago, those who had donor advised funds were, or 39% of them already had a gift in the will, and another 19% said they were going to do so in the next 5 years. I just see that. I mean, the options for succession planning and so forth, they're just huge. So but we have a question about basically how to get started, and that is definitely something we wanted to address. So I think we should pivot to that because
sure.
just watching where we're at here with, um, I know you have a tool that you've been working on, and maybe there's some tips in there you want to highlight. You want to talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, let me hit on that, and then I see a question, Bernie, in the chat. We'll hit on that before we finish as well, and I'm sure there'll be other questions. But I think that's a great place to go, Doug, because so the book is basically arranged into four parts. The first part is why sustainable giving matters, and it's not just what you think. Some of the stats we shared, but it's just really establishes why the subscription economy has transformed recurring giving, the history of recurring giving, how we can take advantage of it. The second part of the book is how specific lessons we can learn to grow recurring giving from my national study, as well as from the subscription economy, those interviews I referred. And this is where the third part of the book comes in. The third part of the book is how to build and grow a thriving recurring giving program. And so, Doug, as a part of that, I unpack a 7-step framework for growing a recurring giving program. That's, like I said, it's about a quarter of the book. It's a substantial step by step, here's what to think about. You and I were just talking about this morning with technology, like, what your transition process is like from your donation processor. And we'll maybe get into that a little bit later. But so it's a 7-step framework. And then the fourth part of the book is the future of recurring giving, how I see trends continuing to change and what we should look for on the horizon. But that third part of the book is really the meat of what charities can do. And so, as a part of that, I've basically taken that 7-step framework and created just a PDF guide. It's about 20, 25 pages. We're just putting the finishing touches on it. So the guide is called the Sustainable Giving Growth Blueprint. And so, and Janie, we can bring that up, but so you can see we are basically, I'm taking a very high line view of the resources from the book and then putting it into this PDF guide. So it's obviously not the book. There's a lot more richness and depth in the book, but it's something that I think is going to be a very helpful tool. So if you're interested, you can download that. We can drop the chat into the link into the chat. And this basically gives you a high level view of what I'm going to talk about here for a few minutes. And then, by the way, I mentioned we just finished it. Like it's just getting the final touches. So if you do sign up, you'll get a confirmation. This will add you to the wave report and let you know about some of our resources. But in the next week or so, we'll send out the actual full guide. So just a heads up. So 7 steps. I'm gonna just name them, and then I want to just go into just two, for sake of time. So the first step to growing your sustainable giving growing program is to benchmark the program. We're going to come back to that. The second step is to understand your donors. The third step is to craft an ongoing value proposition. The fourth step is to align your technology. The fifth step is to design your program. Sixth is to grow your program, acquisition and conversion. And the seventh is to cultivate the program, which is all about onboarding, upgrading, retaining, preventing lapse, and reactivating. In fact, that seventh step, 97% of the value of a recurring donor takes place after the first gift. So maybe 90% of the effort is to get the first gift, but 97% of the value is after that first gift. And so I do go into that in depth. So today, let's just look at two of these. The first one, I mentioned benchmark a program. And then the third one that I mentioned was just to craft an ongoing value proposition. So when I say benchmark a program, it's really hard to know where you're going until you understand where you stand today. And so my first recommendation for folks that are interested in growing the recurring giving program is to just benchmark where you are today. I asked two questions. The first question is how many? The second question is how much? So how many recurring donors do you have today? And then how much are they giving? And I like to look at all giving from recurring donors because, like I said, your recurring donors are going to give you 25% on average in addition to their regular recurring gifts. And so when I look at the how much, I try to express that in two ways: annual recurring revenue. So how much, if you multiplied the monthly recurring revenue by 12, or if you have the last 12 months, basically how much are you bringing in annually? And then how much are you bringing in monthly recurring revenue? So businesses, Doug, in the subscription economy live and die on those two numbers. They're called MRR and ARR, monthly recurring revenue and annual recurring revenue, because they realize like that's essentially the cash flow to run their subscription. And in the fundraising space, that's our cash flow to do our ministry or to do our mission. How many, how much? And then two other metrics I always like to look at are then once you know how much, just what is that as a percentage of your total revenue? As I mentioned in those early years at Union Rest Commission, it was low single digits. What's your percentage? Some organizations, by the way, on here might be a child sponsorship charity and they're at 85%. Awesome. There's work we can do, but that's great. Some organizations are going to be at 9%. Some are going to be at 14%. What the percentage is doesn't matter so much as to understanding where you are today because you can't measure your progress unless you understand where you are today. And then the last number I recommend is long-term value. I have a chapter on this in the book, including how to calculate it. And long-term value is simultaneously the most important metric in fundraising and the least utilized and most misunderstood metric in fundraising. And so the easy way of doing long-term value, it's a little harder to calculate than the other numbers, is to look at 60 months or 5 years of giving from any new recurring donor and then do the same for your new single gift donors. And that's where you'll see that 5 to 7 times difference, if that makes sense. All this is in the blueprint.
Single gifts over 5 years versus recurring gifts and single gifts.
Over 5 years. So you can really understand for you, what is that reality? Because when you're making things like, decisions, for example, on acquisition or budgeting, you need to understand, well, if this donor is worth 7 times, I've seen 9 times, 10 plus times the value, then you need to understand that when you're making decisions.
So Bernie's asking this question about defining, and I have this question too, and I wonder if we should spend some time here because I think, what if so I might ask it different than other people, but how do you count? What if I write a check every once a month for 12 months? But let's just say I can give you a bunch of different scenarios. I use my bank's web bill pay, so I don't have to, the charity doesn't incur that transaction fee. Or I'm just a check writer and I write checks, but I skip a month because I forgot,
Right.
and then I make it up I skip March, but I make it up in June, and at the end of the year I have 11 transactions, but the next year I have 13 or something.
Sure.
Like, how does that matter?
It does in a decreasingly check oriented world. Some of those complications are less critical. But the way I like to define it is any automated recurring transaction, and that's very much a modern terminology, right? Because wouldn't have been automated, when my dad, wrote the check out and tore it out of the checkbook, when he was sitting in the pew on a Sunday. But in today's day and age, the easiest way to measure it, and I think the most accurate, is to look at any automated recurring transactions. And so some of those, by the way, are bank, bill pay type,
Yeah.
transactions where you just turns out every month you receive the exact same amount on the same day, like, so there's a little detective work right in that to assume, well, we get that. But I would not include, well, yeah, we do have these people that write us checks and they write more than 5 checks, a year. There, I wouldn't assume they're a recurring donor. The only exception I would make to that is if you literally still had an old school, what I call pledge program, where you have people that are the friend of the ministry and they literally receive a pledge fulfillment letter and they send their check in. There are still some of those programs.
Okay.
I would include those.
Yeah. And I think, yeah. So from your perspective, it's got to be, there's going to be some automated piece to it. It's not just the sense that I'm trying to, in my head, blend that with the idea that the frequency really, in terms of a planned gift, is really important. It doesn't matter how
It's
often.
great, yeah. And 5+ gifts in a year is a good indicator that they're probably a recurring donor, but obviously not 100% of them would be because they might have just written 5 checks. And by the way, we're talking about like less than 10% of most organizations' files. So what I wouldn't want people to do is get paralyzed by, well, do we count this one? Or do we count? And it's like the vast majority of them are going to fit in that, automated recurring behavior. And by the way, I saw a question from Tim related, which is frequency of giving.
Like,
That's the reason I use the term automated because increasingly we are seeing automated annual recurring donors and quarterly recurring donors. I saw multiple campaigns this last year, mostly political, that actually asked for a weekly recurring gift, which I thought quite clever, especially when it's like, there's 13 weeks to an election or whatever. Like, why ask for a monthly gift when there's only 3 months before the thing you're raising money for, right? Ask for a weekly gift. So I think frequency is increasingly shifting, and I do write about that in the fourth part of the book. The vast majority are still monthly, but I think we need to be totally cool with a quarterly gift or a automated annual gift. I've seen increasing charities doing that.
do you treat them differently if they're quarterly or annually versus monthly? Is there a different kind of stewardship of that donor?
Yeah, there's some slight variations, but you still want to communicate with them. You still want to send extra gift appeals. You still want to occasionally offer upgrade, ask them to consider increasing their giving. So it's not too much different. And again, most organizations either literally don't even allow it in their payment systems, or it's a very small number. But it is one that I'm keeping an eye on.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Um,
that hits I think Frank's question here too. I see.
we have another one here. Thank you. Letters of donation. Many donors use the envelope. Yeah, yeah. That's I did interrupt you. Did you cover all the points you wanted to cover on the blueprint?
So yeah, let me hit the second piece from the blueprint that I mentioned, which was the pull up my notes here, the crafting and ongoing value proposition. And so one of the mistakes that I think organizations make when it comes to recurring giving is they will often take their best, what I call single gift offer, and then they just say, would you give that monthly? So, perfect example, 20 years ago, Union Rescue Mission, the program that I walked into and was trained on was essentially a called a meal a day program because the best fundraising offer for a rescue mission at that time was a meal and shelter, right? And it was like, would you just give that, I think at that time a meal, um, given the gifts in kind and things that they had was maybe a dollar 13 or something like that. So that conveniently added up to about $35 a month. Would you give $35 a month? The problem, Doug, is that often the best single gift offer does not make the best recurring gift offer because in that case it was a inanimate object. You're sponsoring a meal and shelter. Um, it didn't, and then it ultimately was something that was a little more, I don't want to call it disaster oriented, but a little more urgent need oriented, impulse gift kind of oriented, which works really great. What we did as I entered that program was that they modified that program and redesigned it into what I would call a representative child sponsorship. And basically, because of the number of women, children, and families that the mission was serving, they reoriented the program to say your gift each month will help women and children like, and then we would tell stories, anonymized, not their real photos, all those things for privacy purposes. But that program immediately leapt in fulfillment rates, in growth rates, and was a significant, and this is again 20 years ago, like significant increase. And so what we need to do is to if we're going to ask people to give on a monthly basis, we need to craft what I call an ongoing value proposition. So, just a couple keys to an ongoing value proposition. Number one, it justifies ongoing involvement. So, it is something that is an obvious, understandable thing that you will be doing every month to fight for, or to stand with, or to accomplish, or to minister to. That is critical. I think of my, Spotify subscription, which I gladly, send Spotify $16 a month or whatever for the family plan. If you would have said to me 10 years ago, Dave, you should send the music company $16 a month to get access to music, I would have been like, no, I own, some people had their CDs or tape collections. I had my MP3 library on my computer. And I thought, why would I send the rent music from the music company? Then if I ever stop renting it, it'll just go away. Well, the reason I spend with Spotify is because not just because I'm renting music, but because of the joy of discovery and the fact that it's regularly giving me ongoing value, introducing me to new artists and new musicians and songs that I haven't heard before. It's giving me access in every device. I can get in the car and be on my laptop and on my phone and get access to the same playlists. And it's creating community. There's a lot of benefits, and I do actually talk about that in the book. But that's the idea of moving from a one-time value proposition to an ongoing value proposition. Two other points on cultivating an ongoing value proposition. It cultivates a connection with human need. So this is one of the things that I see charities do a lot. What they actually do, like in terms of their services, is they build radio towers, or they build orphanages, or they dig wells, or they, truck supplies from, the Gift and Kind Center. And the mistake is to assume that the mistake is to assume that that is what people are giving to. It's like, no, they're giving to the outcomes. They're giving to the humans that are impacted on the other side of that radio tower that you built, that then made it so that that programming could actually reach that person and uh, you know, um, uh, uh, give them access to the gospel, those sorts of things. So that's the second piece. The third is it describes the need in terms of survival, safety, and belonging. So I'll end with this. We can go to the next question, but survival, safety, and belonging. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy, right, that we have our survival needs and then our safety needs, belonging, and then there's several ladders above that, including self-actualization or whatever. Um, we need to articulate our offers, our ongoing value propositions down in those first three base needs: survival, safety, and belonging. And I believe every charity, whether or not you're feeding people or providing life-saving medicine, you can articulate what you do in terms of outcomes into survival, safety, and belonging. And so what does it look like to articulate that in your ongoing value proposition? So, like I said, we go through all 7 of these steps, obviously in the book, but for folks that also want to grab the PDF, you can just download that or sign up, and then we'll send it to you here in the next week or so as soon as it's ready.
Awesome. We've kind of blended our discussion into some of
Yeah.
the Q&A. I did want to give folks a chance, one more, if they want to download either that blueprint, or if from what you heard today, you want to talk to someone from Money for Ministry more about planned giving, we'd love to schedule a time for a free consultation. So there's 2 QR codes there. One, again, for that blueprint to connect you with Imago Consulting and Dave, and then the other one to connect you with Leah on our team if you want to hear more about growing your planned giving programs. So those QR codes there will get you going in the right direction. I did want to quickly, I know Laura had a question about DAFs, and I thought we'd just hit this. We were talking about DAFs earlier, and the question was about, I've heard you technically relinquish the money and you're merely an advisor. That is true. You're not wrong about that. That's absolutely true. But does this mean that the institution does not legally need to follow your advice where to give the money and can therefore discriminate? That's true as well. Now, people that get tends to get people a little bit concerned, like, really, can they say no? Technically, they can. You are an advisor, but you have to recognize too that these donor advised funds wouldn't exist if they made a practice of denying gifts like that. And I think for the most part, for people of faith, you may want to look at some of the faith components. I've never heard that it's been a problem for ministries and donors. There might be some situation where they might determine that the group is a hate group of sorts, and that might be something then they would not donate to. But by and large, I am not aware that it's a problem. So I want to make sure we address that question for Laura before we move on. Um, Yeah, recurring giving, again, there was a question here, Dave, and this came out of some of the registration questions that we got as people were signing up. Is there a way to automate recurring giving without it feeling impersonal? I wonder if you've given thought to that.
Yeah, I think and actually you and I had talked about this a little bit before. The phrase that I've heard occasionally from nonprofit leaders that I want to call attention to because it's a myth now is this idea of set it and forget it. The point of automation is not to trick your donors into giving to you and forgetting that they're giving to you because we've all been burned now by subscriptions that did that to us. You know, that annual health subscription that you forgot that you had that charged you, again, or that trial that you couldn't get out of, right? And so good subscriptions today understand that is not a winning strategy because it costs too much to win the customer and you lose them forever if you do that. And so the way I would think about automated giving, which again is what we encourage people to do, is now you have a deeper relationship with that donor. Now you, by the way, probably shouldn't be asking them as much. Depends on your ask frequency. They should probably receive fewer asks, more of affirmations and encouragements, but they should also receive asks. Like I said, they do tend to be some of the best responsive, most responsive single gift donors. And so I would think of automation as simply on one level, it's a gift type. It's like, oh, cool. Now we got the automated gift. Now we don't have to worry about that idea of like, oh, we got to get another gift out of them. We got to get to 2.4 gifts a year, from this donor. Now you can totally affirm them, tell them stories about how their gift is making a difference. And yes, occasionally offer them opportunities to give additional gifts or to increase their current gift amount. And so that's one of the things we unpack in that part about how we cultivate a thriving recurring giving program.
Very much like what we would recommend for a thriving legacy donor program. If you set them and
Yep.
forget them, you're going to lose them, and there's no growth there. And you got to steward them, you got to love them, you got to keep doing that till the day, like say Jesus calls them home, which is just part of that ongoing, but part of that ongoing relationship. But then what I was going to say to that is it allows you to thank these donors while they're alive and deepen that relationship. I had one question here. Someone said, can you add someone to your DAF to manage it when after you pass away? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. And I want to make sure I'm such a huge fan of DAFs. I know there's concern that the money sits there and doesn't get distributed, but I think it's a huge opportunity not only to give today, but to leave a legacy for the next generation, to leave successor trustees, to empty the account upon your death. You can leave you can make final distribution requests. So there's a ton of opportunity here to continue to do that, or to continue to give and to steward your gifts after you're gone with a DAF. Huge opportunity. Um, we are getting to the end of our time here. Was there anything else, Dave, that you wanted to say about current giving that we haven't touched on yet?
I'll close with this. If you take those 75% of charities that have historically been left behind that now have a chance to grow recurring giving, and you just see those charities grow 10%, not even 10%, sorry, 5% over the next 10 years. So you take individual giving to those charities and just say 5% growth, conservative, that would result in a additional $119 billion causes accomplish the mission that they're called to. So for me, yeah, I wrote a book. I'd love for you to buy it. But the reason I did was to call attention and really to wave a flag in the sector to say, hey, generosity uh, is is been being shaped in part by what's been happening in terms of recurring giving. It is one of the unfortunately few bright spots we see now as fundraisers in this day and age, and it's enabled this rise of sustainable giving, which is more accessible, like I said, to more charities than at any other time in history. And so I hope you can take advantage of that. Love hearing stories. If you do sign up, you get emails from me. Those are from me. You can reply. Like happy to hear the feedback and just really appreciate that. And thank you guys for all you're doing, Doug, at the organization and what Canopy's doing to help the broader sector as well. Just love it.
Awesome. Dave, thanks so much for being with us today. It's been great. I love this conversation. Tons of fun for me. I know for us, and hopefully for the listeners. I saw a ton of engagement in the chat and the questions, so it's been fun. And many of you know this, but Money for Ministry, our heart is to see the church thrive and flourish in all its forms, whether that's a local congregation or a nonprofit ministry, like many that are on the call today. We hope that you can continue to deepen relationships, restore lives, and transform people's relationship with God by the power of the gospel. And we give thanks that Jesus has come, that he's risen, and he's coming again to make all things new. So grateful to be with you on this journey, Dave, and celebrating today. I'd like to just close with a blessing for all of us here on the call. So receive this blessing. Saving God, you have restored us to life. You've brought us back again into your love. Through the death and resurrection of Jesus, we pray that you continue to heal us, and may the work that we do continue to heal others as we live and work and play in the power of your Spirit. We pray. Amen. Thanks so much, friends. Thanks for being with us. Thanks, Dave. Look forward to hearing more from you. And February 4th is, like you said, just a few days away. Congratulations. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Doug.